Defense News is proudly sponsored by Navy Federal Credit Union. If you're a member of our nation's armed forces, the Department of Defense, or if your family is, we'd be proud to serve you too.
On this episode of Defense News Weekly, the Pentagon institutes a COVID-19 vaccine mandate. Plus, ever see an A-10 land on a highway? That and new shock trials for carrier Gerald R. Ford. We also get an inside look at a new digital cockpit design for military helicopters and hear from an expert on layered missile defense and how it works. And the top official from the Missile Defense Agency joins us to talk about the latest issues in that arena. We'll hear what Vice Admiral John Hill has to say. With the latest news and analysis from the Pentagon to the platoon, this is Defense News Weekly. Welcome back to Defense News Weekly. I'm Daniel Woolfolk. There's a lot going on in the military and defense worlds this week, starting with the hot button topic of COVID-19 vaccinations. As the Delta variant pushes new cases to their highest levels in months, the Pentagon has responded by requiring service members to get immunized. Jesse Karengu brings us more.
Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin recently announced that he will ask President Biden for waivers that will make COVID-19 vaccines mandatory for service members by September 15th. The reason for these waivers is because the 3 current COVID-19 vaccinations that are in existence and available aren't FDA approved, and they're still considered experimental. We spoke with the Military Times' Megan Myers, as well as attorney Anthony Kuhn, about the implications that this has, as well as what this mandate means for service members.
The best we can gather from this timing of mid-September is that the understanding is that the Pfizer vaccine will probably be fully FDA approved by the end of this month, and then maybe the Moderna and Johnson & Johnson soon after that. So Austin is, with this timeline, sort of hedging that maybe some of these vaccines, by the time he's prepared to make them mandatory, will already have that FDA approval. And therefore that will help ease that transition for some people who are apprehensive about getting a vaccine that is still under an emergency use authorization. The decision is in support of military readiness as far as the Pentagon is concerned, especially because the Delta variant has become so contagious and has become such an issue. They're not looking at the same sort of travel bans and things that they had last year, or all of the testing that they did for everybody who was leaving on deployment and coming back. They're saying, we have the solution. The solution is to get vaccinated. And if you do get vaccinated, we won't have to do these tests. We won't risk you going down range to, a small outpost and infecting, your unit and the other people that you're there working with. They really do see it as a readiness issue and a way to get rid of some of the friction that they've had over the past year, trying to keep everybody safe and only really being able to rely on masks.
Despite the Pentagon's assertion that the COVID-19 vaccine will help with military readiness, attorney Anthony Kuhn acknowledges that there will be service members who do not want to get vaccinated and will have to face a new reality.
If somebody does not want to get the vaccination, the first thing that I would say is maintain your military bearing, make sure that you stay composed in dealing with this issue. We understand that it's a stressful issue and that individuals are concerned about their own health and about their right to be able to choose whether to get this vaccination or not. That said, you don't want to make the problem worse than it could be. So maintain your military bearing, and there are options. Obviously, there's the potential and the likelihood of a federal court challenge, which we would expect to happen in the very near future. But then for service members who are in and are waiting for that court case to play out, there are waivers that could potentially be obtained, just as we do for flu and other vaccines. An individual who is not vaccinated and refuses to get that vaccine or refuses to provide consent to get the vaccine, those individuals could face a number of different actions. It could be anything from an administrative separation with an honorable discharge, all the way, the far extreme would be we expect that some commands will court-martial individuals for refusing to take the vaccine. And obviously you've got your in-betweens. There could be administrative actions taken against those individuals. It could be administrative separations, non-judicial punishments, general officer memorandums of record, things of that nature can be put on individuals' files, which in most cases will effectively end their military career regardless. My advice to service members who are considering refusing to take this vaccine is the big thing is maintain your military bearing. You're still in the military. You're in a situation where you know you can be court-martialed. If you emphatically refuse or deny, you refuse to get this vaccination, then the best case scenario is an administrative discharge with an honorable discharge. And we're going to help individuals make that happen. But it's much more difficult to do that if an individual puts themselves in a position where they make the commander an enemy. So we don't want to have service members fighting back or making this more difficult than it has to be. If you choose to not get the vaccine, then make sure that you maintain your military bearing and you do what's in your best interest so that you can get the best possible outcome. And that may be an administrative separation with an honorable discharge.
For those who are already vaccinated, Military Times' Megan Myers tells us that there's nothing to worry about.
At this point, if you are already fully vaccinated, whether you did that at your on installation clinic or you went to a CVS, all of that information gets sent to your command and is trackable. So if you've already been fully vaccinated, your command should know, and it wouldn't require you to get vaccinated again.
Myers also tells us that there's nothing new when it comes to the military requiring vaccinations, and that there's precedent historically.
So there are already 17 mandatory vaccinations that service members get, and one of them is the flu vaccine, which they have to do every year, of course. And so there are already mechanisms in place to track and make sure that everybody is up to date on their vaccines. And there are also mechanisms, for repercussions if someone doesn't stay current on their vaccines. And that can start with being non-deployable, but if there's an outright refusal, that can go all the way up until non-judicial punishment and even, administrative separation from service. And we also have some very old examples of vaccines being made mandatory, back to the Revolutionary War and George Washington's troops being required to be inoculated against smallpox. So this has been going on in the military as long as we've had one.
The Pentagon says more than 1 million troops are already fully vaccinated, while 237,000 troops have at least one shot. Specifically in the Navy, 74% of active duty and reserve sailors have at least one shot. In the Army, 50% of service members have received at least one dosage. And in the Air Force, 65% of active duty members are partially vaccinated. For Defense News Weekly, I'm Jesse Karangu.
Thanks, Jesse. In other news from around the military, multiple branches have recently staged some eye-popping exercises. First up, the Air Force. Looking to practice some contingency operations for austere areas, the Air National Guard recently staged takeoff and landings on a closed section of a Michigan highway. Thunderbolts and other aircraft practiced the maneuvers on a strip of highway they called Thunder LZ. Why didn't they call it Thunder Road? We're not sure. And the Navy put the aircraft carrier Gerald R. Ford through another round of shock trials, releasing footage of the impact of the nearby underwater detonations this week. The Ford has seen a number of serious issues in recent months, but is now completing sea trials that include the tests which are meant to simulate battle conditions at sea. That's it from the military this week. When we come back, look at some cutting-edge tech for military helicopters. Stay tuned. Welcome back. The Army has for a while been looking to advance its helicopter technology, an effort it calls Future Vertical Lift. For one take on how the cockpit of a future helicopter might work, Military Times reporter Todd South hopped in one version to check out the latest and get a look at a new helmet heads-up display.
So currently, the Army's helicopters are pretty old. They're decades old. The Black Hawk, the Apache, the Kiowa, anything you can think of is decades old. And so the Army's looking to replace them. And to do that, they've got a program called Future Vertical Lift. It's going to build an attack helicopter and a reconnaissance helicopter. They're going to go much farther and do much more than current helicopters do. And recently, we visited one company that's offering a lot of solutions to a lot of problems that Army has. It's Thales, they're in Virginia, and here's what they had to offer. So the first thing up is a digital cockpit. Right now you still have toggles and switches, all kinds of buttons. When you got to replace things, you got to tear apart the entire helicopter pretty much, or at least the control panel to make that happen. Pretty much taking smart technology like tablets and making that the cockpit. So they've got anywhere from 2 to 4 touch screens that a pilot can use. They can touch, move, zoom in, just like you do on your iPhone or your iPad or any other kind of tablet or device. They can do all kinds of computer-assisted items with those different kinds of software, from tracking targets, looking at terrain, checking out weather patterns, all kinds of things through these tablets and connected systems.
We're looking at the Thales Flight X cockpit solution, which is an evolution of a long line of Thales cockpits that we've been developing for transport category aircraft as well as military aircraft over many decades. What's different about this than what you currently see in helicopters is an advanced man-machine interface, as well as an open systems architecture that allows us to interface with not only Thales software and hardware, but those of third-party systems. So traditionally, a pilot's been required to use a keypad and a textual interface for making changes, but now it's a simple matter of utilizing touch on a display to bring up context-sensitive menuing and to decide what option they'd like to do. So in this case, we're going to remove a waypoint from our flight plan. We can just hit clear. It proposes the new flight plan, and we accept that.
And tying in with that cockpit is a heads-up display. Now currently there's a helmet basically that has been in use by the Air Force for about 10 years called the Scorpion, and Thales provides that. And what it does, it gives a monocular viewpoint that connects in with the cockpit and gives a data feed to them, and also helps in seeing different types of target acquisition items, navigational headings, and all kinds of data that you need for symbology. Now Thales is developing a binocular version, so better depth perception with 2 eye holes there, and they've also improved their motion tracker to decrease what's called latency. Basically, if you've ever played with VR and you have a headset on, you move your head quickly, and that tracking doesn't catch up with you, well, it can make you sick, and that can happen to helicopter pilots too. So their advances in decreasing latency has helped in speeding up the processing and allowing for that helmet to work in a real-time way.
So this is the Scorpion helmet-mounted cueing system. So this is a monocular full-color display system with a Hobbit hybrid optical-based inertial tracker. Provides helmet cueing and head tracking for fixed-wing pilots and rotary-wing pilots, giving them enhanced situational awareness. What it does, it sits behind the night vision goggle and gives them day-night capability to wear night vision systems, while also doing cueing with symbology in support of their mission. So if that's a A-10 or a gunship, they can look around and have enhanced situational awareness, see symbology, and have that enhanced picture of what's going on below them to support the ground force customer. And then for a helicopter, what it does is provide landing zone symbology and cueing to help them to create a visual environment. And then we can also pull into the optic sensor feeds, etc., so have kind of picture-in-picture viewing. So if there's a lightning pod or sniper pod in the aircraft, or some kind of ISR sensor, that can be displayed picture-in-picture with symbology as well, to give them a picture of what's going on around them.
Ahead of me I see a silo, kind of a concrete silo where we've dropped a red X. If I go immediately to my right, cue over to my right, I see like a blue diamond shape on a more of a cylinder type building that I spotted earlier. At the same time, I've got this picture-in-picture video like I'm watching 2 football games at once, but instead of that, I'm watching essentially a drone feed coming into what I'm also seeing with all this other stuff in front of me, a full vision on all sides as I'm looking out of the cockpit. Basically. One cool feature about the heads-up display in the helmet is you're going to be able to do what's called see-through technology. So a pilot wearing this helmet and having this technology could essentially look through the floor or through the ceiling of his aircraft and see what's outside through camera systems. So you can really get a fully immersed situational awareness. And that actually also translates to soldiers in the back ready to hit a landing zone. They're going to have their own system, basically a new system that's going to give them a night vision type goggle with new data. They can see out the aircraft before they actually exit the aircraft. So they're not going in blind. For Military Times, this is Todd South.
Next up, layered missile defense is a complicated concept for keeping U.S. interests safe, but Editor-in-Chief Mike Gruss recently got the chance to explore the topic with an expert from Raytheon. Here's part of that conversation.
I want to start because we hear this phrase, layered missile defense, a lot, but I was hoping you could detail what a layered system would look like in action.
Thanks, Mike, and I am very grateful to be here and for you to spend the time talking a little on this subject. So layered defense, you're right, we talk about it a lot. What does it mean, right? What it means to us is to be able to detect, track, identify, and kill any threat launched from anywhere around the world to the homeland, right? And the way we do that is have many layers, as the name implies, from space through air to the ground, with overlapping capability and also with communication between the layers. And what this enables us to do is have our sensing capability and our effectors all interconnected, all able to communicate. And therefore we get multiple opportunities to sense, to see, to shoot at a particular threat at any point in its trajectory. Even from an offensive standpoint, if we get intelligence that a threat is moving or being positioned, we potentially can use our assets to even strike or use diplomatic means to stop a launch before it happens.
And I would imagine, we've heard a lot recently about how the threat landscape is changing, particularly with missile defense. We hear about UAVs, cruise missile proliferation. Obviously, a lot of attention is being paid to hypersonic gliders. How do all these new technologies change the mission or raise the need for exactly what you were just talking about, that kind of layered defense where everything is a little more integrated?
Yeah, that's a great point, Mike, and that is the most compelling argument for some of the changes we need to make in our system. Right now, we're seeing three major trends in the threats. One is just pure quantity. We're seeing proliferation like never before. We're seeing those threats have much more advanced capability than before, and we're also seeing numerous new launch points, right? Our current system, our current BMD system, as the name implies, was designed for ballistic missile threats, those that fly a very predictable trajectory, much like when you toss a football. The new threats, they're moving much more quickly. They're much more maneuverable. They can even attack, be launched through the exo-atmosphere, through space, and also from a lot of different places, not just land-based anymore, but they can be launched sea-based, air-based. We're even seeing capability for submarine launches of cruise missiles. So while our current defense system is very good, it's not adequate to keep up with this new threat set, and therefore it's compelling, again, that we evolve it today.
When we come back, tips on how to choose between a 15 and 30-year mortgage from Navy Federal's personal finance expert, and later an interview with the Vice Admiral in charge of the Defense Missile Agency. On this edition of Money Minute, Navy Federal Credit Union personal finance expert Jeanette Mack tells us how to decide which type of mortgage is right for you.
Did you ever hear about a 15-year mortgage and wonder if it's for you? While most people feel they know more about a 30-year mortgage, there are pros and cons to both. The biggest and most important difference between the two is cash flow. The question is, can you afford to pay more per month now, or do you need to have more available funds in your budget? A 15-year mortgage usually has a higher monthly payment, but the advantage is you'll be paying for half the time, and so you'll own your home outright that much faster. Of course, it has to be in your budget to either put more of a down payment on your home or pay a higher monthly payment, or both. A 30-year mortgage, by comparison, has lower monthly payments, which helps free up cash for things like paying bills, paying down debt, and saving for college or retirement. It might take longer to own the home, but you'll have an asset and hopefully some savings in the end. Before you decide, run the numbers between a 15 and 30-year mortgage and ask your lender for guidance. You never know, your home could be all yours faster than you think.
Thanks, Jeanette. We'll see you next time. To get more of our coverage, be sure to check out our headlines at Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marine Corps Times.com and DefenseNews.com. To get the most up-to-date stories in your inbox every weekday, subscribe to our Early Bird Brief and make sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. And when we come back, a conversation with the head of the Defense Missile Agency from this year's Space and Missile Defense Symposium. Welcome back. As Director of the Missile Defense Agency, Vice Admiral John Hill has a complicated mission, keeping the U.S. and deployed forces safe with a layered defense system. Hill spoke to Defense News at the Space and Missile Defense Symposium in Huntsville, Alabama.
I wanted to talk about sort of an overarching, very important system that I don't think gets a lot of attention, which is the command control battle communications, or C2BMC system. It's embarking on another round of critical upgrades, and that's the backbone of worldwide missile defense capability. So talk about those upgrades and why they're necessary, and do you believe the C2BMC upgrade plan is adequate to keep up with the emerging threats?
Hey, great. First, I'll just tell you what C2BMC is, right? So command control, battle management, communications. It is that hardened network that is global, that allows us to connect all things missile defense. It really started off as a way to connect homeland defense. So, and for those who are ship-oriented or battery-oriented, when you think about a ship or a Patriot battery or THAAD battery, you'll have the sensor and the command and control and the missile launchers all co-located, right? But when you look at a global intercontinental ballistic missile threat, you're going to want to have sensors that are way forward and that come back. You're going to have your missile fields in another area. You're going to have your command and control someplace else in the nation, right? So how do you connect all that together with the right latencies, the amount of data that you need to pipe through so that you can seamlessly detect, do the command and control, and then engage. And so C2BMC is that. And then what we found is once we connected up the ground-based missile defense program, ground-based mid-course defense, GMD, then it was a great way for us to then bring in the regional system. So connecting Aegis with THAAD, THAAD with Patriot. And so again, because of the global nature of missile defense, that's really what command and control battle management does. So you can kind of tear apart the acronym a little bit, right? Command and control is one thing, and it means a lot to a lot of different people, but that word signifies to me, this is where the warfighter touches the system. So if you're going to fight this battle and you're General Van Herk up in NORTHCOM, you're going to see the tracks that are coming off of those sensors on the glass there in his command center so that he can fight this war. The battle management functions are those functions that when we have tracking information, classifies that track as a ballistic, a cruise missile, or something else. And then the communications pieces is how we move that information, across the different, parts of the system, whether it's a sensor, another fire control system, or another weapon system. So, are we keeping up with the threat? Well, by our own nature, as you make a change, either in threat going against us from a homeland ballistic missile defense perspective or to the regional Aegis, THAAD, Patriot systems, then you want to have the appropriate upgrades. And you can choose, from an engineering perspective, how much C2 goes in C2BMC and how much of it stays in Aegis, as an example. How much of the battle management functions can you do at the broader level, or do you want to just leverage the battle management functions within Aegis? And so what we do is we synchronize the systems. So across Aegis and THAAD, Patriot, and GMD, we are synchronizing and we align those changes so that when we do an increment of missile defense capability, it's all synchronized and lined up. So to answer the question, I think it is keeping up with the threat, but it really starts with the changes we have to make to sensors, to weapons, and then in that command control area.
So elaborate a little about the upgrades, but also how C2BMC, as you evolve it, is really, it sounds a lot like what we're looking at when we talk about joint all-domain command and control. So how does C2BMC, how will that play into the development of that?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. So C2BMC, if you actually open up our program record, we're actually going to integrate with JADC2. So JADC2, when you just listen to a joint all domain, right, C2BMC is really about that domain of missile defense and the domain of space, the domain of air. We have some land and at sea capability as well, right? So we start to look very all domain. So I would say that today, where we are today, if you look at what JADC2 is doing in the long term, C2BMC is the JADC2 for MDA. But as we bring in other sensors and other service capabilities, then they just really start to merge. And so again, program record, we intend to connect with the JADC2. We have connected already with IBCS, we've connected with CEC. So there's various ways that you can do that. Okay. But it is important, from a joint or interoperability perspective, that it's all seamless to the warfighter. And there's a lot of work to be done to make sure that that's the case.
And that's all the time we have for this week. Please visit us on militarytimes.com and defensenews.com for more coverage. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week.